Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 7th of February of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk once again about the massive missile and drone attack that took place during the previous night between the 6th and the 7th of February. This picture was published this morning. Once again we can see hundreds of roads from the territory of the Russian Federation in the direction of the western part of Ukraine. The Russians used hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles. The Russians used Ha-101 cruise missiles, the Russians used Zircon hypersonic missiles, and the Russians used Kalibr missiles. Once again, the Russians were attacking objects of energy infrastructure in Ukraine, and according to information we have, one of the power plants was destroyed. So later, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine provided us this article where we can see the numbers, how many drones and missiles the Russians used during the previous night. In total, the Russians used 447 air vehicles, including drones and missiles, and the Ukrainians managed to bring down 406. Once again, as a result of this attack, another power station was destroyed, and this time the sources are saying that the Russians destroyed the Burshtinska power station. This one, we don't have videos, we don't have pictures to confirm this, but the sources are saying that several damage as the Burshtin power station severely damaged and stopped working. As a result of the night's attack by the Russian Federation, there is no heat, hot and cold water in Burshtin, Ivano-Frankovsk region, said the mayor of the city, Vasil Andreshin. So since the beginning of this year, it is probably the fourth power station that was completely destroyed by the Russians. First two power stations were destroyed on the territory of the city of Kiev. This is the power station number 4 and number 6 in the eastern part of the city of Kiev. During the previous days, the Russians also destroyed the power station in the area of the city by the name of Ladizhin. We had a video published on the 4th of February right after another Russian massive attack. Here we can see the consequences of attack, and the sources are saying that this power station was completely destroyed. And today we received the report that the 4th station was completely damaged and destroyed, and this time the power station on the most western parts of Ukraine. So 4 stations, and we have proofs of this, either statements or videos that can confirm this. But according to information we have, there are a few more stations that were destroyed, and 2 of them are located on the territory of the city of Kharkiv. But as of this end of the 7th of February, we still haven't received even a single video that can confirm this, just the statements made by the mayor of the city. So the situation is critical, and another important thing is that the Russians were attacking not just power station that generates electricity through Ukraine. The Russians forced the Ukrainians to shut down their nuclear power station due to the lack of power in the energy system. The nuclear power stations were forced to move down, and very difficult to say when the Ukrainians are going to restore them, but obviously within the next several days. And another important thing is that the Russians attacked this substation, the 750 substation, Zaporozhye substation. This one is a very important one because the Ukrainians use this substation to receive electricity from the European countries. So if somehow the Russians are able to destroy these 750 substations, Zaporozhye substation, then Ukrainians will not be able to get electricity from the European countries. We're not talking about, let's say, the entire electricity that Ukrainians are receiving, but probably up to 40 or even maybe 50% of imported electricity will not be able to get the state of Ukraine. So that was a very important attack from the Russian side. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but the situation is very critical, and we see that once again the talks are on the verge of complete collapse. Once again, I would like to remind you that yesterday there was an assassination attempt. A high-ranked Russian general was attacked. He managed to survive. Today we received the report that the executor of this attack was captured on the territory of Dubai, and most likely he would be transferred to the territory of the Russian Federation. We still haven't received anything on the matter of the third party that ordered this attack, but several experts reported that maybe some country was involved in this situation, and if this information is confirmed, then most likely Russians will quit the negotiation process, or at least the Russians will postpone the talks and the Russians will continue the conflict. Another important thing is that Zelensky also made lots of very interesting statements on the matter of talks between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States of America. And of course, this is he made lots of very interesting statements, and probably we've been waiting for these statements since the beginning of this negotiation process. But the problem is that neither the Russians nor the Americans published the same statements. So this step from Zelensky was a wrong step when talking about the negotiation process, because the Russians and the Americans agreed to keep everything in a secret. But now we see that Zelensky decided to reveal details. We stand our ground. Ukraine again emphasized that it will not leave Donbas. Zelensky disrupts negotiations and rants about an energy ceasefire, given this on the position of standing still as a basic model for a possible ceasefire. There is no general decision on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. One user of Oreshnik from Belarus and the country is drawn into war. The Russians want this, stated Zelensky. The US proposed a de-escalation of strikes on energy infrastructure. Ukraine agreed. We are waiting for a response from Russia. For the first time, the US proposed that the negotiation teams of Ukraine and Russia meet in Miami in a week. Kyiv is ready to participate. In Donbas, a free economic zone may be created. More details about the US proposal: purpose, restoration of infrastructure, attracting investments and creating jobs through tax reducage. This is planned as a demilitarized zone where troops are withdrawn for 40 kilometers and order is guaranteed by international contingent. A decision on such a zone could be put on a nationwide referendum. So this is the statements that were made by Zelensky, and he also emphasized that US has proposed that Ukraine and Russia end the war by early summer and will likely pressure both sides to meet this time frame, Zelensky told the media. He recalled that a trilateral meeting of delegations from Ukraine, the US and Russia took place in Abu Dhabi on February 4th, 5th. During the talks, the military leaders of the two sides discussed the technical aspects of a possible ceasefire monitoring in the event of a political decision to end the war, particularly with the participation of the United States of America. So as you can see, the Americans want to finish the war by the early summer of 2026. Furthermore, we have details about this plan. These deadlines, the US wants to conclude a peace deal on Ukraine in March, not in the early summer, but in March, so the next month, and hold elections in May, but this is unlikely. These deadlines will likely be pushed back due to the lack of territorial compromise. Kyiv rejects the agreement until security guarantees from the United States and other countries are approved. There is no agreement on Donbas and the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. The discussed scenario, an agreement plus a referendum which they want to hold along with the elections in May. So Zelensky and the Ukrainians, the current Ukrainian authorities understand that this is impossible to finish everything within the next 2-3 months. So that is why we will see more attacks from the Russian side and more attempts from the Ukrainian side to turn the situation in another way. As for the situation on the ground, you know that during the previous 24 hours we received lots of very interesting updates. Important thing, I would like to remind you that several days ago there was the great disconnection. The Russians were cut off the Starlink system, and several sources reported that at some places, at some front lines, the Russians lost control over their armies. As of the end of the 7th of February, we still haven't received proofs about this, but today we received several interesting updates that might be related with this situation. So let's discuss everything in details, and let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction first of all. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates. We received the video from the northwestern part of the city. Here we can see how the Russians discovered the fuel depot of the armed forces of Ukraine, and then the Russians attacked this fuel depot with several drones, and the depot was destroyed. As for the situation on the ground itself, the most important changes are coming from the eastern Zaporozhye direction. Here we can see the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 3rd of February. This is the end of the 4th of February. This is the 5th, and this is the 6th of February, and this is the end of the 7th of February. As you can see, the Russians during the previous 4 or 5 days managed to improve their positions significantly. The Russians managed to cut the pockets to the south of the city of Gulyai-Polye, and now we have enough of proofs that the Russians managed to restore this logistic line between the city of Gulyai-Polye and the southern parts of the Zaporozhye region. Based on this video, we have adjusted this territory. Furthermore, several pro-Russian sources and neutral mappers reported that the Russians managed to improve improve their positions even further in the western direction and to take under complete control several fields, tree lines, and fortifications. At the same time, we received a report that Russians improved their positions in the eastern part of the city of Zaliznychne, and very likely in coming days, the Russians will establish complete control over the territory of the city, and the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area completely. Another important direction is the Verkhnya Tersa and Vozdvizhivka directions. During the previous 24 hours, as you can see, the Russians improved their positions. The clashes for the settlement of Krynichna has begun. The Russians answered the eastern part of the settlement of Tsirkova, and the Russians began approaching the railways between Alexander Konstantinovka and Vozdvizhivka itself. So the Russians are trying to close the gap to take under complete everything to the east of the railways, and this will allow the Russians to continue advancing further in the western direction to begin the battle for the third defense layer of the Zaporozhye direction. So from this perspective, we see that there were no influence, no impact of the shutdown of the great disconnection of the Starlink system. The Russians are keeping advancing. Maybe they have some problems in this area, but as we can see, the Russians managed to overcome these problems and they continue offensive. So this is from this perspective, from the perspective of different mappers and military experts who continue following the situation in this area. But starting on the 7th of February of 2026, we start receiving lots of very interesting updates from the northern Zaporozhye direction, so from the territory between the river of Gaichur and the river of Mokry Yaly. So these are the settlements of Vilika Novoselovka and let's say the settlement of Ternovat. So now, right now, I'm talking about this territory. Since the beginning of the 7th or even the late 6th of February, we start receiving additional updates from this area that show us that something is happening right now here. The Ukrainians are not giving us lots of updates, so the Russians are keeping everything in secret, or maybe nothing is happening, but let's discuss everything in details. Today, several pro-Russian sources, more precisely not sources, but you know that there are every single group of forces of the armed forces of the Russian Federation have affiliated Telegram channels and social networks channels, and there is a group of forces East Telegram channel that provides lots of updates about the situation on the ground. And today they stated that at the same time the Ukrainian significantly increased its activity in the north, conducting 4 attacks by individual units of the 425th Separate Rifle Regiment, the 92nd Separate Brigade, and 95th Separate Airborne Brigade, specifically in one area, and assault grouped in an armored fighting vehicle supported by a tank attempted to break through the defenses of the Vostok group of forces, but was promptly exposed and destroyed by a combined fire from FPV drones, crews, and artillery. So a very interesting article, but very difficult to understand what exactly the Russians were talking about. And no icons, no videos during the day, just small statements by different sources, completely independent sources, and it was very difficult to puzzle everything. So the Russians are trying to tell us, later we received additional details and updates, the Russians are trying to tell us that the Ukrainians began a counter-offensive operation from the north in the southern direction. So along these lines or something like this. Currently it's very difficult to say where exactly the Ukrainians are counter-attacking. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that several days ago, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrsky, stated that in coming days the situation will change significantly in the Zaporozhye direction and around the city of Guliapole. It is very difficult to understand a few days ago what exactly he was talking about, but now we understand that most likely he was talking about a counter-offensive operation, and this counter-offensive operation is happening right now. Today, several pro-Ukrainian sources stated that the clashes are already taking place in the area of the villages by the name of Zlagada. This is the title of Pershetravneva, is a former title of this video, and that Ukrainians are fighting around the settlement of Kalinovska. So according to pro-Ukrainian sources, according to different probably I know, pro-Ukrainian sources and media, Western media, the Ukrainians launched a counteroffensive operation in this region using units, armored vehicles, infantry fighting carriers, tanks, as it was reported by the group of forces is they confirmed, and that somewhere from the north with tanks and so on. The Russians are saying that this attack was completely repelled, but pro-Ukrainian sources are saying that as a result of attack, the Ukrainians managed to break through Russian defense and to capture two villages, the village of Zlagoda, this one, and the settlement by the name of Kalinovska. So these two villages were captured by Ukrainians, or about to be captured, and this situation creates the situation when the villages to the north would be completely cut from supply and support from the mainland. And most likely the Ukrainians will try to secure these territories in coming days, while the Russians will try to unblock this region with attacks in the direction of the settlements of Zlagoda and Kalinovska. So as of now, we don't have enough of details, enough of updates to understand whether this information is correct or not. We're just discussing everything that was published during the previous 24 hours by different sources, pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, and so on. Anyway, let's wait and see, and if this situation is true, then we need to understand that this is exactly the consequences of the great disconnection of the Starlink system. Now let's move further. Another important area is the Dnipropetrovsk direction. According to information we have, the Russians began advancing in the northern direction from the villages of Ivanovka and Pavlovka in the northern direction with the purpose to attack the Mizhovo-Vesele sector. So this is a very important territory, this one, that lays along railways. Ukrainians use this territory as a barrier, as the logistic region to support their forces and to hold the way towards the deep part of the Dnipropetrovsk region. This is a very important defense layer, and if Russians are able to take this defense layer under complete control, then most likely Ukrainians will not be able to stabilize the situation almost until the city of Pavlograd. And several sources reported that the Russians during the previous days began advancing in this area, and as a result of these attacks, the Russians improved their position significantly. As of now, we haven't received anything that can confirm this, so let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously this is a very interesting situation. From the same area, we received the video where the Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine along the railways between the cities of Pavlograd and Pokrovsk. Here we can see how the Russians discovered another concentration of forces of the armored forces of Ukraine, and then the Russians began bombing and attacking this territory with aviation, with FABs, with artillery. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Dobropolye direction. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. So this is the situation by the end of the 6th of February, but let's rewind further. This is the situation by the end of the 31st of January of 2026, and this is exactly the moment when the Russians most likely began their major offensive operation in the direction of the city of Biliska. During these days, we received lots of updates. First of all, we got a report that Russians improved their positions first around the settlement of Sukhetska. Then we received additional proofs. Furthermore, by the end of the 2nd of February, we received proofs that the Russians began advancing and attacking the northern and the northeastern parts of the city. By the end of the 3rd of February, this information was also confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources. Later, this information was confirmed once again by pro-Ukrainian sources. By the end of the 6th of February, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians improved their position significantly to the northeast of the settlement. And by the end of the 7th of February, we received lots of updates from the southern part of the settlement. And according to these updates, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to break through Ukraine's defense in the southwestern part of the settlement and to capture and to take under complete control of this southwestern micro-district. So it's just reports published by pro-Russian sources without proofs. Let's wait and see, but there are very high chances that by the end of the 7th of February of 2026, the Russians entered the decisive and the final part of the settlement of the battle for the settlement of Biliska, which will last for another 2 or 3 or days or a week, and then most likely, if Russians are able to establish control over the territory, the Russians will begin advancing in the direction of the southern part of Dobropolye. So the main part of the battle for the Donbass has begun, and most likely this final battle, one of the parts of this final battle will take place in this region, on the border between Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk and Kharkiv regions. If Russians are able to take these territories under complete control, this can lead to unpredictable consequences. So the entire defense layer of the armored forces of Ukraine would be cut and split into many smaller pieces, and then Russians will handle with every single piece separately. As for the Konstantinovka direction, nothing. If you remember, 2 days ago, or yesterday we discussed that due to the Starlink disconnection, the Russian offensive attacks dropped significantly, and we see that there are no changes between the dates. As for the Slavyansk direction, the Russians improved their positions. First of all, the Russians are keeping advancing along MO3 roads. So during the previous day, additional changes were recorded. So the situation here is very complicated and difficult because there is a Seversky Donetsk-Donbass, river, canal, along the western flank of this territory, which reduces the Ukraine's logistic capabilities. The only way how to get supply and support to this area goes from the north and probably even along MO3 road, and probably this territory is under complete control of FPV drones. So that is why the Ukrainians have problems with the supply of this territory, which means that the Russians, if they continue and keep advancing further in the direction of Fedorovka Druga from the area of Nikiforovka, can cut encircle completely the Ukrainians to the south of the settlement. So it seems that the battle for this territory is coming to its logical end. The Ukrainians most likely in coming days will retreat from this area in the northern direction with the purpose to organize defense around the settlement of Raya Alexandrovka, with the purpose to win some time and to stabilize the situation for another week, months, or something like this. But at the same time, we received the report that Russians improved their position significantly along the river of Seversky Donetsk. So these strategic hills were captured by the Russians according to neutral mappers. These are the highest positions on the entire eastern Slavyansk front line. If Russians establish control over this territory completely from these hills, the Russians will be able to control everything between the villages of Krivaya Luka, Kaleniki, and Riznikovka, which most likely will lead to the situation when the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this territory in the western direction towards more reliable positions that are not under complete fire control from the Russian side, from the Russians who control these elevations. As for the Liman direction, the Russians improved their positions as well. The Russians have a small task to take under complete control this pocket between the villages of Stavki, Zarechna, and Liman, and it seems that the battle for this pocket also entered its final phase. The Russians have already cut this territory into two smaller pockets. This is the first one and this is the second one. Now the Russians will try to handle with every single pocket separately, and then the Russians will continue their major offensive towards the city of Liman itself. It seems that we can start counting days for the city of Liman. As for the northern Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we received changes that were published by different mappers. According to them, the Ukrainians continued their Barova counteroffensive operation. And I would like to remind you that 2 days ago or yesterday, we received the reports published by neutral mappers, neutral experts, that the Russians were forced to drop their offensive operation there. So about the Starlink situation, we had this article published on the 5th of February after unregistered users were cut off from using the terminal. Russian attack intensity suddenly and sharply dropped, at least in the Ternuvata and Barova directions. So according to this article, the Russian offensive significantly dropped in this area, and as the situation as we can see right now somewhere in the northern part of the Zaporozhye Frontline, most likely right now is happening in the Barova direction. Due to the fact that Russians have problems with communication, the Ukrainians decided to counterattack in this area and to restore control over a significant number of territories, and probably even to restore control over the corridor between the northern Kupiansk direction and the Barova direction. So Ukrainians may try to counterattack in this area with the purpose to restore complete control over this corridor between the river Oskol and these Russian positions. This will improve the logistic of Ukraine in the northern Kupiansk direction, and basically it will rewind the situation almost till the summer of 2025. As for the northeastern Kharkiv direction, the Minister of Defense, as well as the group of forces north, stated that Russians improved their positions significantly around the village of Chuhunivka. These are the changes on the ground between the dates. The Russians, as you can see, as a result of offensive, improved their positions and forced the Ukrainians to fall back. As you can see, the Russians continue the task to create a buffer zone along the border on the territory of Ukraine. The Ukrainians are bringing additional forces in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation, but the Russians attack everything that enters this territory. First of all, we're talking about reinforcements and reserves. Furthermore, in this video, we can see another concentration of forces. There are temporary deployment points that were attacked by drones and with aviation. In the Sumy direction, the Russian offensive operation is gaining momentum. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes were recorded, and during the previous days, the Russians improved their positions significantly to the southeast of the city of Sumy. Now the Russians are tasked to create a buffer zone as well, and if the Ukrainians are not able to stabilize the situation, of course, the Russians will keep advancing further in the western directions towards the settlement of Krasnopolye. The city of Krasnopolye is connected with railways with the territory of the Russian Federation, and if Russians restore these railway service, obviously it will ease their plans for further offensive operation in the direction of the city of Sumy itself from the southeastern direction. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.